Hi, I'm Susan Peters, and I'm the founder and the global director of Unbound. And I want to sincerely thank you for joining us in the fight to stop human trafficking. We are so honored that God would tug at your heart to join in this with us. When we started Unbound in 2012, we really didn't know what we signed up for. What we knew is that we were hearing stories of boys and girls and young men and young women that were being sold. And that just compelled us to say, we have to do something about that. As the people of God, we are compelled into this. And there was just this holy unrest inside of us. And so I just pray that that's what's happening with you. You know, why are you taking this course? Obviously, you were going down one lane in your life and something really stirred you to say, this is not right. And maybe there's something I can do to actually stop it and to see someone's life rescued out of this, restored out of this, or stopped and prevented from this happening. And we need you in the fight to make that happen. And what's so exciting is when we started in 2012 and just raised our hand and said, God, show us how we can make a difference. Now we know that what we do really works. And that having people join with us and become trainers or to support us financially or do prevention, go into the detention schools, become advocates, work on our staffs and other capacities like accounting, just volunteers or staff, when we do that together, that we are seeing thousands of lives rescued and restored, and that makes it all worth it. So thank you so much for taking this course with us. I know a woman who was working in a particular country, and she's a fabulous lady that I've really admired. And every year she takes a group of people to this particular impoverished nation. She focuses on one region, and over the years of her taking these teams and developing, they've incorporated better medical care, better education, microloans that is helping people get out of poverty, and just tremendous work. And I had a friend that went on one of these trips with her, and she told me a story of what happened on that trip. She said that the team was with this woman leader on a second floor, and they were going over what they were going to be doing for that day. And all of a sudden, this big ruckus happened outside, and they went to the window and looked. And there was a young woman who was very mentally ill. And everyone in the town, including the team, knew about this young woman. But the townspeople had surrounded her and literally had stones and were going to stone her. Well, this woman leader just compulsively, she looked up and there was a horse whip on the wall that belonged to the man that had managed that room that they were using. She grabbed it and all of the team ran after her, and she just popped the whip in the air, of course not hurting anyone, but just trying to get their attention with this loud noise saying, you cannot do this, stop this, stop this. And she had her team take that young woman and get her to safety. And when I think about that story, it is such a picture of this woman who loves God, who is raising her family. She's doing what she knows to do to follow after Jesus. She feels compelled for the nation. She starts investing in this area. And when she sees injustice, she's just compelled by the Spirit of God inside of her to do what she could do. And as she did that, it is transforming that community, but it literally saves lives. And so I just want to say thank you for being courageous. This woman was super courageous and just stepping up like that, but you're courageous. You're courageous in that you're not just continuing life as normal, but you have taken time out to say, I'm going to give myself to these lessons and I want to learn what I can do and join the team of Unbound so that we can see as many lives rescued as we can. And so thank you for being courageous with us. I don't think that you can separate justice from God and His church or the people of God. The Bible says that righteousness and justice are the foundations of God's throne. Think about that. The foundation of where our King of Kings sits is literally righteousness and justice. And the scripture also tells us that God is a God of justice. Like it's part of His being, it's part of His makeup, His character, who He is, that He's a God of justice. And the Bible regularly pairs justice with showing mercy, love, kindness, and compassion, especially when it comes to the vulnerable and those that are suffering. Justice is the idea of not only punishing wrongdoing, but it includes treating all people with fairness, protection, and care. And that's what we get to do. We get to represent our King and instill value on other people when we do this work. Many of you are familiar with the passage Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God? And I hope all of you have seen our t-shirts. We have t-shirts about this because it's such a marker on who we are at Unbound, that we want to do justice, that we're compelled to not only pray, to not only give, but we want to do something to see these lives absolutely stopped from being trafficked. And require is a big word. What does the Lord require of you? That means it's not a suggestion. It is a command that God commands us as his people to do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And because justice is such a huge part of the nature of God, when we go out and do justice, we are displaying that character of God that cares about the oppressed, that cares about the exploited. We are representing him. We don't want to be back and just not care. Absolutely not. We want to go in the forefront and show our communities and those that are vulnerable that we do care as the people of God. So that's why I think that the church and the people of God should be at the forefront of displaying God's compassion and justice. So this is part of our responsibility to exercise our compassion and love for others in tangible ways. That God calls us as followers of him throughout the scriptures to feed the hungry, to comfort the hurting, to defend the poor and the weak. And it's part of our kingdom service that displays our God and shows that there's value on every single person. And that's what I love. I love when I see our teams go into the juvenile detention center and they sit with those kids and they do lessons or play games or bring treats and empower them and just listen to them and instill value. When our teams go in and they visit someone in jail that maybe has been arrested, and then they work with the DA like they just did and got someone's case just dismissed so that they can walk in freedom because they were recognized as a trafficking victim because our teams are advocating for them. So many ways that we show love and honor and value on those that we serve, and that's what God would have us to do. One day last week, just take one little snippet out of my week. I went by, had lunch with my husband, Mr. P, and on the way home, we stopped by an eye doctor's office, and she's a supporter of Unbound, and she's employed one of our survivors, and she's doing fabulous. And so one picture that we have that I just love is our advocate had taken one of our male juveniles that we are serving to get some eyeglasses. And he's sitting there, and she took a picture from the back of him, and here's our survivor in her scrubs and such a professional atmosphere, and she's serving this survivor as a survivor herself. It was just amazing and just delighted us to see lives that are being restored because we are there. And then I got the eyeglasses. I went by and picked them up to bring them back to the office. And I walk in, and our advocates are having lunch with an international survivor. And this is one that was picked up by police, and she was put in detention because she didn't have the right documentation. But our advocates were able to continue to go see her, to pray for her, to just be there with her. And eventually the DA's office dropped the charges on her. ICE said they wouldn't deport her. We were able to get her to a safe place. We have an immigration attorney that's working on a T visa. Our law enforcement is working on the continuance of care, continued presence. And so what an amazing picture. Just in one day. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I had a picture that I hung in my office that day that a survivor had painted for me. Didn't know that she was an artist until she was in a safe placement and she started painting, and it's gorgeous, and I'm so proud of it in my office. I hope you can see it sometime. Days like this make our hearts rejoice that all of us at Unbound, all of us those that support us, all of those that make a way for us to get in schools to do prevention or are out in our community, help with our fundraisers or a 5K, those that are on our staffs or volunteers, it all matters. And every one of these lives matter. And so thank you again for being a part of it. I am sure that You have lots that you could be doing, but I just hope that you sense God's pleasure as you work through Unbound. A lot of times it's hard. You hear hard stories and you see hard circumstances. Sometimes it's an up and down road for those that we serve, but it is so worth it because it's what Jesus would do, to go down and love the least of these, and it's an honor to do that. I want us to look at the book of Esther in the Bible. And the story of Esther is a dramatic account that gives insight into God's special and purposeful plan for each one of our lives. And we will see how injustice was stopped and the people were greatly impacted and saved because of someone and because of someones that acted justly. And Esther is a remarkable, courageous woman. And that's really what I titled this message, really is about courage and justice, because it does take courage to step into the hard places in our community to really stop it. Courage means not deterred by danger or pain. It means undaunted and fearless. One definition said the ability to control fear and to be willing to deal with something that is dangerous, difficult, or unpleasant. I think if you asked any of our directors, any of our staff, or any of our long-term volunteers, they will tell you that they have had to learn how to be undaunted. They've had to be fearless at times when they could have been intimidated. Maybe they signed up to be a trainer and they go in and sometimes they'll train 5 people or 10 people, or like one of our people, she goes in and there's 1,000 people to train. And that is something she had to be undaunted, and she did amazing. So many times we are stretched to serve, but God is so able to give us what we need, but it takes courage. I'm going to give you an overview of the story of Esther, and it's such a cool story with so many lessons in it. It's so interesting. The book of Esther in the Bible is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention the name of God. But he is at work throughout the entire story, all the details. His presence permeates every single situation. There's times where you can see him behind the scenes, where he provokes someone to do something to accomplish his mission. And we're going to look at some of those things. To me, it just reminds us of how God is involved in our everyday lives. It may be things like it just feels so natural, like a job. Maybe you're doing case management, you're working on your notes, you're going to get food or some kind of card to get over to a survivor, you're making packets for someone, or maybe you're doing accounting for Unbound, or you're a volunteer going to serve at the 5K. I don't know what your role is, but every single role matters. And we will see that throughout her book. The book of Esther opens with a description of an enormous 180-day party. Can you imagine? It's thrown by King Xerxes. And we know at the end of the party, he calls for his queen, Queen Vashti. He was proud of her beauty and he wanted to show her off. And so he called for her and she refused to come. Well, in that day, if you refuse the king, that is really, really bad. And it was bad for Vashti. She was banished from the being queen. So she lost her ability to be the queen, and that left a hole. And so the advisors of the king said, let's go out and throw a big beauty pageant and we'll select the most beautiful woman to be your queen. And so the queen's advisors went out and did that. And that's where we meet Esther. Esther was an orphan, and her cousin Mordecai had adopted her and raised her as his own. Well, here, this is interesting because Mordecai fears God. He's a Jewish man, and he sees this relative that's an orphan, and he takes her in because he's just compelled by love. And maybe you're just compelled by love. You don't even know what you're getting into. You're just compelled, and you take that first step. That's kind of how God works in our life. You take one step, and the next step, and the next step, and then it'll all make sense. And so Queen Esther got pulled into this beauty pageant and taken away with all these other women. But God's favor was on her, and she ends up being the queen. But she did not get there alone. She received a lot of help from different ones to get to this prominent place of influence, and that influence is for an incredible service of justice. So first we see that Mordecai, he operated in a lot of wisdom. And I think that's really important, and that's something we really pray for, is God, give us wisdom in Unbound, wisdom for all the decisions we need to make, wisdom in how we help those that we're serving, wisdom in how we design curriculum or organizationally or reach out for funders. We need wisdom, so pray for that for us. Mordecai operated in the wisdom of God, and so before she was taken to the palace, he told her, do not tell them about our relationship and do not tell them that you are Jewish. And so she obeyed him in that. We also know throughout the scriptures that Mordecai was frequently in the palace or around the palace because they get messages back and forth to each other. At one point, Mordecai's at the palace and he hears two men that had access to the king plotting to kill the king. He hears that and he tells the queen, you need to warn the king that these guys are trying to kill him. And so it was stopped. Well, so many times we have seen God work in his timing. And this story is really interesting about the timing of Mordecai hearing that and stopping that. The timing of God is so important. One time I was at a city meeting, and I actually have not really been back to this particular meeting since then. But when I was there, the city manager came to me and he said, this billboard company has offered their billboard space if we have a city campaign to use for free. Would you like to use it? And I'm like, absolutely. Do you know we have used those billboards for at least 4 years? 4 to 6 billboards, 2 enormous ones right on I-35 that says, not in my city, stop human trafficking. I mean, the favor of God, each billboard is worth $500 a month in rental space that we have free because of the favor, but the timing that the billboard company had told the city manager and the city manager saw me at that meeting. So thankful for that favor and timing. Well, we also know that there are so many more labor trafficking cases, and it's just really hard to identify those victims and survivors. And there was a time where we were putting on a labor trafficking, and I was really concerned that we would have a very small turnout, even though it's such a need to educate our different agencies about it. And the timing of God, would you believe that we were able to participate in the Vegas buffet? If you look that up, it's a huge labor trafficking case in our community. And that came out just a week and a half before this training. So that training that had very little interest in it, all of a sudden, it got so much interest when that hit the news that we had to close it and weren't able to receive all the people that were interested in coming. And that was just the favor of God that could have happened a month after that training. But God set us up on behalf of the people that we serve. I'm so thankful for that. Over and over again, God gives us timing to make sure we're at the right place at the right time. Well, Esther, she also received a lot of favor from the eunuchs. And eunuchs are those that are servants that went in and throughout the palace to serve the king's needs. And we meet 3 of the eunuchs. One is Haggai, and he helped Esther become queen. She had favor in his eyes, and he put her in the very best part of the palace area. He made sure that she had all the treatments that she needed. And then he tells her what to do when she goes to see the king that set her apart and eventually led to her being chosen by the king. We also meet Hatash, and he was the one that we know related messages between Mordecai and Esther when there were things to be communicated. And then Harbonah, we know that he is the one that suggested that, we'll see in a moment, this bad guy, this evil guy named Haman, he wanted to kill Mordecai, and he built these huge gallows to do that. And this eunuch, Harbonah, was the one eventually that said, hey, he built the gallows, he should die on it instead of this godly man, Mordecai. And so those are only a few of the examples, but we know that there were people that were working around the scene, and just shows us all of us have our part when it comes to fighting injustice. So the king chose this orphan Jewish girl to be his queen. And favor is for a purpose. I like to say we ask the Lord for favor so that we can help people, that there are open doors, that we can advance the kingdom of God, that we can be at the right place at the right time to really serve those that he's called us to. So in Esther 2:17, we learn how the king loved Esther more than all the other women, the scripture said, and she carried charm and favor before him more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown on her head and made her the queen in place of Vashti. Tremendous favor is on her life. Favor comes from the Lord, but for such a time as this. So Psalms 5:12 says, "For you bless the righteous, O Lord, you cover him with favor as with a shield." A scripture I pray often for our directors, for those that are going into schools, for our partners, favor for the finances to come in so we can do this work. God, would you cover us with favor like a shield? And Psalms 90, verse 17, "Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of your hands." Yes, establish Unbound, the work of your hands to help people. That's our prayer, so join us in that. We know that Joseph was put in a place of honor in the Bible for such a time by the Hebrew people. And it says in Genesis 39:4 that Joseph found favor in his sight, and he made him overseer over his house and put him in charge of all that he had. And so we are so thankful, and pray with us for God's favor and God's timing that we can do this work. And we have been able to help hundreds and now thousands of victims of human trafficking because God is giving us that wisdom on how to facilitate our offices in a way that really helps people. And then he gives us favor so that we have the resources we need and the partnerships so that we can get justice on behalf of the ones that we serve. We need favor for the right skilled, called, and gifted staff. We need favor for volunteers because that's really what we're made of. It's the volunteers that really do this work. We need favor for funding. We need favor with law enforcement partners so that we can work with them and get the investigation so that justice can be served. We need favor with agencies so that we can get our victims to the places that they need. And we need favor with the victims we serve to make those connections so that they can trust us and so that we can help them get to a healthier place. And so I'm thankful for that. So I don't know why you are doing this training. I don't know what pricked your heart to say, hey, I want to get involved with Unbound. I want to learn more about this. What is the skill sets that I have that I can offer to help this? I know for me, human trafficking was not on my radar in the early years. I was busy doing just pastoring and doing other things, and I was happy doing that. But when I learned about young boys and young girls and young women being sold, not only around the world, but in all of our communities, I just knew that we had to do something about it. And we are doing something about it. And it is so rewarding. And that God calls us to do justice, to do this work. Human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal industry globally. Over 40 million men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, including right here in our city. It happens every single day. So it matters that we're out there pushing back this darkness so that people can be protected and be restored. I'm so thankful that we have been able to get into schools, and across Texas, we've educated over 40,000 students. Over 30,000 just regionally here in our community are educated about human trafficking, which makes a huge difference. So when there's trials, we are getting enormous sentencing to hold accountable and to enforce justice on the traffickers. So it matters that we are out there doing this work. Some people think that Christianity or a church should stay out of the justice issues, but justice is a primary theme of the Old and the New Testament. Jesus announced that his mission was clear from Luke 4:18 to care for the poor and the captives, the blind and the oppressed. He cared for the marginalized, and throughout Scripture, like I said, in the Old and the New Testament, there's a mandate to the people of God to reach out to those that are poor and oppressed. There's always been a compulsion that God has called us to make up a difference for him. And so as Christ followers, we are called to do justice, to take action and to confront evil. And that takes courage. To care for the vulnerable means to make what is wrong right. That's justice. Justice is our call. From the earliest time of Christianity's, believers were the ones who started orphanages. From the 4th century, they started that. Christians were the ones that started hospitals when they saw the sick distributed throughout the city and wanted to gather them in one place so that they could take care of them. Christians were the ones that started schools to educate children that were illiterate, that they knew were destined for a life of poverty if they didn't learn to read. And it was the church that started Sunday school to meet that need. It's a brilliant plan of God to call us as his people to step into this space to fight injustices. Our churches have a variety of skill sets to offer. I'm so thankful for our attorneys, our law enforcement, our IT people, our teachers, our nurses, so many that are here. Collectively, we have a volunteer army, and we are motivated by our faith. And we can provide more resources financially when we come together and we meet the needs to help our communities. We have regular training schools or meetings where we can communicate the information to really help our communities. And so I believe that the people of God are God's plan A to push back injustices. So the book of Esther is all about God's heart for justice and the lengths that God will go to on his quest to use ordinary people like the eunuch I mentioned, like cousin Mordecai, like this little orphan girl, to dismantle entire structures of injustice. Esther is like us. She was tempted towards persevering her individual role as a wife and a queen and not get involved in that injustice. She ultimately lays aside self-interest in order to fulfill her responsibility to the larger community. Justice permeates the story of Esther. We see public justice advanced in her story. We see government restrained and a people group remain free. They are free to flourish because the individuals stepped into the orchestrated plan of God. They could have said no, but they pushed through the fear to do it. So when we look at Esther, we also see a bad guy. And there's always opposition. There's always challenges. Not only the traffickers, the perpetrators, the buyers that we can see as obvious bad guys, but sometimes there's other agencies, other policies that can cause obstacles for us to do our work. In Esther chapter C, we see the bad guy in this story as Haman. He's the top dog, the prime minister of the day. He is vengeful and he's egotistical, and he's the number 2 guy next to the king, so he seemed unstoppable. And he hated Mordecai because Mordecai was a follower of God, and he wanted to kill Mordecai. He finally goes to the king and he says, "King, there's this people," which were the Jewish people because he just hated Mordecai. He said, "They've multiplied. They don't follow our customs. I think they're a threat and we need to issue a decree and kill all these people." And so the king flippantly just agrees with him and signs a decree that the Jewish people are going to be annihilated. And it is a terrible, terrible day we see. In Chapter 4 of Esther, another interesting thing happens. Mordecai hears about this edict going out, and he goes to Esther and says, "You have to stop this." Can you imagine? All the people are going to be killed. The soldiers are mounting up. They're going to go search out the Jews. And you, little orphan girl that are in there, one little person, you need to stop this atrocity. Sometimes we can feel like that. Human trafficking, fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, happening in every one of our communities. And it feels big and it can be immobilizing. And God says, "No, you go and you stop this injustice." And God is doing it. And that's what happened to Esther. And Esther, of course, is saying, "I can't do this. I can't go before the king. He'll kill me if I go in unsummoned." And Esther chapter 4, verse 13, it says, "Do not imagine," this is Mordecai speaking, "do not imagine that you can save yourself in the king's palace from the fate of all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, and you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." You know, I get a little emotional when I read that because that's the way I feel about combating human trafficking. I think, God, you've called some amazing, brilliant people. They've left some of their fields of expertise and they've brought those skill sets in this fight. Some are serving overseas, others are serving in our communities. I have one friend that's been volunteer training with us for a long time. And when she switched over to another firm, in her interview, she said, I am a volunteer trainer for Unbound, and I can only take this job if I can leave occasionally to go do these trainings because I'm so passionate about stopping human trafficking to our kids in schools. And of course, they gave her the job. But that's the kind of passion that I see, and such passion in Mordecai to say, if you don't do this, I'll raise up someone else, but you're going to miss out. And I just think, God, I don't want to miss out on what you want to do through the people of God in this day. So sometimes we are given divine moments that alter circumstances, and we need more Mordecais. I'm amazed when I see God tap on different ones and call them to work with us. Mordecai fulfilled his mission. He did his part, and he not only fulfilled his part, but he saw Esther and mentored her and pushed her and called her for her to use her part too. And so maybe you'll do that. Maybe you'll make connections for other funders that you know, family members, and say, hey, join us, support Unbound, come and train, come and be a part of this. People in other cities, that's what we're believing the Lord to do. And most of you probably know this song by Amy Grant. Originally, she was going to sing it. It was actually a song that Bart of Mercy Me wrote, and it was called I Can Only Imagine. Amy Grant was set to sing that song for the very first time publicly. Bart had written it and given the rights to Amy Grant to sing, but he was in the audience when she was going to sing it that first night. And then something shifted in her. And in that moment, she just knew, this is not mine to sing. This is Bart's. And she calls Bart out of the crowd and says, you come and you sing this song. The song is the best-selling single of all time, selling 2.5 million copies and blessing so many. She was a Mordecai. She used her influence for the benefit of someone else. And I believe that's what we're to do, whether that is direct contact with trafficking victims or it's around supporting the work. There's influence that we can use through our connections to make this work go forward. Well, courage kicked in for Esther, thank goodness, and she agrees with Mordecai, but she doesn't take it for granted. She says, I need to ask the people of God to fast and pray for 3 days before I go, but I will go, and if I perish, I perish. You know, there was a time where she just had to say, it is the right thing to do no matter what it costs. And I know, especially some of our directors, some of our staff, they've left things that they got a lot of fulfillment out of, or maybe financially got a lot out of, but they said, I have to do this work. And I just want to honor that decision. And I honor you for doing this course. I don't think God takes it lightly, and I don't take it lightly as well. But sometimes we have to stand in courage in the midst of fear, and Esther had to do that. And to do this work takes a lot of courage. And I remember when I was kind of wrestling with the Lord to do this work, and I thought, God, it's so dark. It's so evil. The stories are horrific. I don't know if I can handle it. And many of you may have heard me tell this story, but I was reading a children's book. It was called Jonah and the Worm, and it was the story of Jonah told from the worm's perspective, and God tells the worm to go and preach in Nineveh so that they can repent, and the worm is saying, I don't want to go, they're mean, they're murderous, I don't want to, they're scary. And then finally he yields to God and he goes, and as he goes, he starts glowing, and he didn't realize he was a glowworm. And then this one little sentence said, you don't know what can come out of you until darkness surrounds you. So that great light came out of him, but not until the darkness surrounded him. And that was such a pivotal moment for me. Well, Esther wisely asked the king and Haman to come for a feast the next day, and look at the wisdom and the timing of God again. They do come to this feast, and then Haman is so proud to be invited by the queen to this dinner, and then she invites them to come again the next day. Well, that evening, think about the timing of God that we're praying for, right? Wisdom and courage and the timing of God. that night, the king can't sleep. So he has someone come and read to him the chronicles of what's been going on. And he reads about how Mordecai had overheard these two guys plotting to kill him. He didn't know that that came from Mordecai. And he said, that saved my life. Has something been done to honor this Mordecai who saved my life? And they said, no, nothing was ever done. So the next morning, Haman comes in, proud as a peacock, because he's going to go to a banquet that afternoon with Esther. And the king says, what should be done for someone that I want to honor? Well, Haman was so prideful, he's thinking, oh, it must be about me. And he said, oh, let him wear one of your finest robes and your grandest chariots and be brought around the city for all to see. And so he said, that's a great idea. I want you to take Mordecai and do that for him. Wow. So Haman is like absolutely upset because his arch enemy, who he had jealousy and envy and anger towards, he's got to parade and celebrate. And so he does that. And then when he does that, he's so upset when he goes home and tells his wife that his wife says, you need to build a big gallows and you need to hang this Mordecai from it. And so he and his sons build this tall gallows that he was intending to kill Mordecai. Well, they came to the banquet. And when that happens, Esther says, King, there's someone who is trying to kill me and my people. And the king is like, who would do such a thing to come against the queen? And she said, it is Haman. And Haman is like shocked because, of course, he doesn't know that she's Jewish. And he's like, oh, no. And so the king is so angry that he goes out into the garden. And then Haman falls on Esther and says, help me, don't kill me or whatever. Well, the king comes in and sees him on top of Esther and he loses it. And that's when the eunuch says, hey, there's a gallows, you can hang him from it. And he did. And then the king made Mordecai his prime minister, a righteous person. Well, I told that story, but what I want us to see is that there are so many people in here that God promotes the right person at the right time in the right places to advance his kingdom and protect those that are vulnerable. We see that Mordecai just walked in the wisdom he had, doing what he could, and then God promoted him to this prime minister position. That obstacles do come, the enemy comes, there are hard things we have to work through. There is opposition by people trying to stop us, but we have to trust the Lord and keep persevering. We see that Mordecai started by just taking in the orphan and doing the next thing. We see that Esther was courageous when she took on that new role, and then she submitted herself to the wise counsel of Mordecai and then the eunuchs. We see the eunuchs that they served for the greater good. They didn't begrudge the small part they had, but what would have happened? I don't think Esther would have ever been chosen as queen if the eunuchs did not prepare her for that position. So every part is so critical. Again, we know that there are Hamans. We cannot be deterred by the evil that's in this world. We cannot let it shut us down. We have to be courageous even when we have to face fear. And then the king. We at Unbound really want to honor those that are in our community, honor the DA, honor the police chief, honor other agencies. We will always speak positive about the organizations that we partner with. We will always promote and bless our school teachers and administrators and law enforcement because they're so critical to this. And so the same with the king. His position was important. We need all of those, and we want to serve and honor all of our partners in every way that we can. We should all live purposely, and I pray that your time with Unbound, you will find great purpose and the pleasure of God on your life for doing this. I pray that you'll be sensitive to his leading and that you'll be willing to leave the discomfort, just to embrace the discomfort of even hearing these stories or knowing that you're doing it. It doesn't make for the best conversation at dinner with your friends, and I wouldn't advise that anyway, but I'm just saying some may not understand why you would invest so much on behalf of those that are being trafficked. But I think it's the Lord inside of us that's compelling us to say it is not okay for a young boy, a young girl, a young woman to be sold in our day and time. That is not the dignity of God. And I want to do everything within my power to stop this. And Unbound is an amazing vehicle to be able to do this and to do this together. As fully devoted followers of Jesus, I know that he works in our life and he builds compassion and that he can enable and strengthen us to endure the pain that we see in those that are being trafficked and to compel us to action. We are making a difference. We are reaching thousands of human trafficking survivors and victims. We are in the most vulnerable places, giving prevention so we can keep this from happening. We are in the spaces within our community and with our leaders to do systemic changes just within our judicial system so we can really make a difference. And I want to thank you for joining us so that we can do it even better. So whatever your role is, thank you. Thank you for being courageous. Thank you for praying and praying for us to have wisdom so that we can do excellent best practices. Praying for God's timing, that we're at the right place at the right time, that we pivot with things that are changing so that we can be at the forefront to help the most people that we can. Pray for each one of us to be courageous and not shrink back when there's Hamans, when there's discouragement, when there are challenges. We want to be people of courage. I want to leave with you this blessing from a monk, and I just think it's very compelling even for our work. This is from the 1400s, and it reads, "May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and the exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain to joy." Thank you for joining us at Unbound, and I pray that your time with us, you will just absolutely flourish and thrive and glow no matter how much darkness is around you, and know that together we are making our world a better place, a safer place.